Hey, Katie. We have the Whispering Statue. We are on Chapter 14, Suspicious Caller. The intruder was taken completely by surprise. It was easy for the three girls to hold him. As he became obstreperous, so he's kind of becoming unruly and he's making a lot of noise and fighting back. George used a judo trick which buckled the man's knees and he fell. "Let me go!" he shouted. "Hold him," Nancy said. "I'll get the police." She was sure George, with Bess's help, could manage the man until the officers arrived. In her excitement, Nancy forgot to disguise her voice and wondered if the intruder might have recognized it. I hope not. She raced from the shop to a corner pay telephone a block away and called the police. Nancy explained the situation to Captain Turner. He promised to send a squad car at once. As she hung up, a disturbing thought occurred to Nancy. Although the police captain could be relied upon to keep her real identity a secret, Debbie Lynbrook's part in the incident was bound to come out. "Mr. Basswood will know I was investigating the place. He's so suspicious of me already, he'll probably discharge me, so he'll probably fire her." As Nancy ran back to the art shop, she hoped that Bess and George had been able to hold the man. A moment later, she saw the shop door burst open. The girl's captive was running away. Nancy was too far away to stop him, but in a moment Bess and George dashed from the building. By this time, the man had sped across the street and jumped into a car with its motor running. A companion who sat at the wheel immediately took off. Nancy cried out, "Stop! Stop!" and ran into the street. Instinctively, the driver swerved in her direction, as if he intended to run her down. She jumped back to the sidewalk just in time. "What luck!" she thought. "I wonder what happened." By this time, Bess and George had come up to her. Shamefaced, they said that despite George's judo skill, they'd been unable to hold the man. "He has muscles like steel," George remarked. "Sorry, Nancy." Bess spoke up. "We did our best. Who do you think the man was? A burglar?" Nancy explained that he was the man who had escaped through the front entrance of the Drew home the night Mrs. Merriam was there. "Since he didn't break into the art shop, he must have a key to it," George said. "This is proof that he's in league with Mr. Basswood." "Yes," Nancy replied. "I've been sure of that ever since he broke into our house and attacked Dad. Well, girls," she added, "let's hope the police catch him. And don't feel too bad about losing your man. We got a valuable clue." "We did?" Bess asked blankly. Nancy pointed out that the intruder had murmured the name Marco. She at once thought of MDK. The person could be Marco DK? The young detective said excitedly. "And if he's tied in with the mystery of the Whispering Statue, Marco may know where it is. We must try to find him." "Apparently," George added, "Mr. Basswood owes Marco and this man a large sum of money." "Do you suppose," Bess suggested, "that Mr. Basswood keeps a lot of money in the shop? For instance, in that hidden room?" "Very likely," Nancy replied. A moment later she added in dismay, "We've locked ourselves out! And that book on painters and sculptors is inside! Now I can't check to see if MDK or Marco DK is mentioned in it." "Cheer up," Bess urged. "Here come the police. Maybe they can open the door." Two officers arrived in a car and were given the details of what had happened, and also the license number of the car in which the intruder had escaped. "I'm Debbie Lynbrook, and I work at the shop," Nancy added. George spoke up. "That man didn't get anything. By the time he forced his way into the Drew home in River Heights, he forced his way into the Drew home in River Heights. The police are still looking for him." The girls gave a minute description of the man. Then Nancy asked if the officers had any way of getting into the art shop. They shook their heads. Before the officers stepped into their car, Nancy said, "We're staying at the yacht club. If you pick up this man, will you please call Mr. Ayer and tell him? He can pass the message to us." The men promised to do so and left. As the girls started for a taxi stand, Bess stopped abruptly. "Wait a minute," she said. "I just had a horrible thought. Suppose that thug tells Mr. Basswood he saw us in the shop." Nancy frowned. "He may, but more likely he'll be afraid to tell because Mr. Basswood would know he was poking around the shop." When the girls arrived at the yacht club, it was near lunchtime, and Bess declared she was starving. "I could go for a great big steak and french fries and a chocolate fudge sundae," she said. George looked at her cousin sternly. "Eat all the steak you want, but no french fries or sundaes. How about substituting a big bowl of spinach and a grapefruit?" Her cousin did not reply. She merely made a face at George. So George's like, "Why don't you eat healthier?" Everyone was talking about the gasoline explosion and what damage it had done. They asked Debbie Lynbrook about the art shop and were sorry to hear that some statuary and paintings had been ruined. Nancy suddenly thought of the statue on the front lawn of the yacht club. "Is it all right?" she asked the people at the next table. "Yes," a woman replied. "The earth tremor wasn't felt that badly up here." Mr. Basswood did not telephone Nancy to come back, so the three girls put on beach clothes and wandered down to the dock. Dick was there. "Hi," he said. "You're just the people I was going to contact. Debbie and George, how about you and Ned and Bert entering the races this weekend?" "It'd be fun," said George, "but we don't know whether or not the boys are coming down." Nancy remarked, "If we enter, we'll certainly need a little practice." Dick suggested that the girls go out now. Bess said she would stay ashore this time. She giggled. "I don't want to get dumped into the water again." Nancy and George exchanged smiles. They knew that Bess preferred staying on land and talking to Dick, who was certainly a most attractive companion. They rowed out to the top job and climbed in. Nancy set the sails while George handled the tiller. There was a stiff offshore breeze, and Nancy began tacking. For a while, the girls were the only sailors on the bay. Then a craft larger than theirs headed toward them at racing speed. Nancy and George thought nothing about it until suddenly they realized that the skipper was not going to give them right of way. So they are not going to move and let Nancy and George go first. "Nancy, there's no identification on his boat, and look at him!" George cried out. "He's wearing a stocking mask!" Nancy exclaimed. So it's a mask that's usually made of kind of stretchy material that goes over the face and head. It was evident that the stranger not only did not want to be recognized, but that his plan was to upset the top job and injure the girls. "Hard alee!" yelled Nancy, and swung the boom. So she's, it's one of the, I think, horizontal parts of a ship, so they're trying to shift the boat. She avoided the other boat by inches. Nancy still ran with the wind toward the clubhouse dock. Twice her pursuer tacked across her bow, but each time she zigzagged out of his way and got back on course. Finally, he gave up and headed toward the ocean. George heaved a sigh. "What do you make of that?" Nancy admitted she was puzzled. "That skipper may be someone we've seen," said the person who's controlling the boat. "I'm sure he's part of the gang that would like to see us quit work on one or both of our cases." When the girls reached shore, they told Bess and Dick what had happened. Dick said he would report the incident to the police at once. "That guy out there is a menace." "Agreed," George replied. Bess said that Dick had offered his car to the girls for the rest of the afternoon. "Terrific," said George. Nancy smiled. "Thanks a lot, Dick. That's great." The girls went to their bedroom to change into their street clothes. So, clothes, non-beach clothes. As they opened the door, the telephone was ringing. Nancy scooped it up. "Debbie Lynbrook?" a male voice asked. "Yes." "Hello, this is Sylvester Holden. I have some interesting information for you. There is a man named Marco DeKeer who makes very fine reproductions. He lives in Redville, which is about 25 miles from Waterford. If you can get over there, I suggest you pay him a visit." "We'll certainly do that," Nancy said. "And thank you very much, Mr. Harry Silver." She and Mr. Holden laughed over his pseudonym, so fake name in this case. When Nancy told her chums the news, George was excited and eager to meet Marco DeCuire. Bess said she was a little scared to do so if he were a pal of Basswood's. And speaking of pals, I wonder if the police have caught that man who got away from George and me. I'll find out, said Nancy, and dialed police headquarters. Captain Turner said he had no news to give her. We think the man has left the area, but there is still an alarm out for his arrest. The three girls finally got started for Redville. When Nancy drove into Waterford, she did not take the highways, but began weaving through various streets. What's going on? George asked. Are you giving us a sightseeing trip of this town? Nancy explained she was trying to elude any car which might be following her. At the moment, we know that at least 3 people don't trust us. Mr. Basswood, Mr. Atkin, and the man who attacked my father and came into the art shop. George nodded. And don't forget the guy who tried to capsize us on the bay and those kidnappers. After Nancy was sure no one was on her trail, she drove to the highway and headed the car towards Redville. The trip was made quickly. She learned that Marco DeCuire's studio and workshop were in an old barn on the outskirts of town. The front yard was filled with terracotta statues which stood amid high grass. Here and there a rose bush reared its head above an overgrown flower bed, and a few hollyhocks towered over the weeds. Nancy did not pull into the driveway, but parked across the road. She chuckled, for a quick getaway if necessary. The large double doors of the barn were wide open. The girls walked in. On display were statues of many sizes, made of various materials. There were a few marble pieces, and the girls wondered if these were original from which Marco DeCuire was making reproductions. The rest of the barn was cluttered and untidy. Bess and George decided to go outside and look at the sculptures in the yard. Maybe we can pick up a clue for you, Nancy, George said. The young detective walked through the barn and found a man in a rear room just putting on a white smock. As Nancy said, "Good afternoon," he turned around. "Oh, how do you do?" he said. "You startled me. Why didn't you ring the bell?" "I'm sorry," Nancy answered. "I didn't see one. Are you Marco DeCuire?" "Yes. Who sent you here?" As Nancy was trying to make up her mind how to answer his question, she appraised the man intently. He was middle-aged and had a swarthy, so kind of yellowy, complexion. His dark hair was long and he wore a full beard. DeCuire's outstanding features were his black eyes, which glistened intently. He may be talented, Nancy thought, but I bet he's cruel and scheming. Aloud she said, "I wasn't exactly sent here. Your name was given to me by a man in New York who knows a lot about statuary. He suggested that I might find a statuette I like." Nancy gave the man a naive smile. "I can't afford an original marble." "I see," Mr. DeCuire replied. "Well, look around, and if you see anything you like, let me know. But I warn you, my prices are high." Nancy made no comment. She went back to the main part of the barn and started looking around. Presently, she picked up the statuette of a monkey and turned it over. On the base were the telltale initials MDK. Meanwhile, Bess and George had been walking around outside. Bess happened to glance down the road and saw an approaching car. The next instant she grabbed her cousin's arm. "Here comes Mr. Basswood!" she cried. "We must warn Nancy!" Uh-oh. Let's see what happens.